When we yell at our athletes, the prefrontal cortex, the logic part of the brain, the part of the brain that can process, the part of the brain that can think things through, the part of the brain that can strategize, the part of the brain that learns skill shuts down. And the part of the brain, as Dan Siegel says, the part of the brain that takes over is the amygdala and the brainstem, the base, the primitive part of the brain, the fight, flight, or freeze. So when you scream at somebody, logic is very difficult and skill acquisition is very difficult because their brain has now gone into that fear mode. And so with athletes like that, our first piece of the puzzle to start to build resilience in them is to calm them back down, to get them back into a blue head, as the All Blacks would say.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Coach Reed Maltbie to the podcast. He has a master's degree in sports psychology and early childhood development. He has dedicated his life to creating the best environments for athletes of all ages to achieve peak performance on and off the sports field. Coach Reed has implemented training programs with all types of sports organizations: Gaelic Games Association, U.S. Sailing, USA Hockey, USA Swimming, Ontario Volleyball, U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, Soccer Canada, and PGA of Canada, to name a few. As a former Division I athlete, Coach Reed is no stranger to the impact of language in eliciting peak performance. He shared his own experience with the power of words in his 2015 TEDx talk, Echoes Beyond the Game, and has contributed educational content to hundreds of media outlets, such as the Huffington Post, NBC Sports Engine, ESPN Radio, and Sirius XM FC shows Coaching Academy and Beyond the Pitch. A seasoned public speaker and motivator, Reed has also published multiple coaching resources, including a chapter in the textbook Youth Sports in America, and the coaching program and tool cards, Positive Discipline Tools for Coaches, which was released in 3 languages. The essential work he has done through keynotes, workshops, webinars, and courses in the sports space has supported hundreds of thousands of athletes and tens of thousands of coaches on 5 continents. Today, he resides in San Diego, California, with his wife and 3 kids, where he continues to serve the sports community while developing programs that help everyday competitors unlock peak performance in their respective fields through his new venture, Everyday Excellence. In this 2-part conversation, we dive into Coach Reed's new book, The Spartan Mindset, Mastering the Language of Excellence. We dive deep into the impact of words on performance, including 3 types of words we can use as coaches: words of peril, words of power, and words of transformation, and lots more. As always, if you enjoy the podcast and want to grab a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download the free notes. And finally, if you're interested in a 5-month mentorship program, check out the link in the show details. And finally, if you're interested in a 5-month mentorship program with me, check out the link in the show details. Spots are limited. Now to my conversation with Coach Reed Maltbie. Enjoy the show. Let's transition a little bit, and I want to talk maybe practically about how to work with, engage with our athletes that really lack a resilient mindset. You mentioned this towards the beginning of the conversation, and I think some of what we've been talking about obviously is key in that. But as coaches, when we find ourselves working with athletes that lack a resilient mindset, that sometimes I'll just refer to as they're mentally fragile, right? There's a moment of adversity that hits, and then boom, they're shook. Their performance suffers. They're not in the moment anymore. We've all seen it so many times. You see it on the highest stages and down to the smallest stages, right? One moment can absolutely shake someone mentally, and often, right, the ones that really struggle with resilient mindsets, they just can't come back to that place of peak performance. And so, talk to us about how we work with those athletes to help them actually build a resilient mindset.
Definitely. I was on a podcast yesterday for women entrepreneurs, and she was resilience based, the coach, and we were talking a little bit about this. Resilience is a muscle. We have to look at it like a muscle, because it's not something that we just one day we have or could lose. And it's not something that we just don't tap into and then all of a sudden it still works. No, it's something that we have to train regularly, and it's something that we have to instill. It's something that we have to cultivate. And so we have to think about the fact that this is a long-term thing. You're not just going to say to an athlete, be resilient, or read a book and now I'm resilient. No, it doesn't work that way. It is a muscle that needs to be trained. With those athletes that have those fragile mental acuity situations, it's usually because of, for lack of a better term, trauma. They have failed miserably in the past and were humiliated for it, or made fun of for it, or yelled at or demeaned for it. They failed and it had an epic impact on an outcome that really shook them. They have a fixed mindset. So they feel like skill is innate, and they were born this way and it can't be fixed, it can't be changed. And if all of a sudden they start losing, then they were an imposter and they never actually were good. That's that fixed mindset that Carol Dweck talks about. So there's some kind of quote unquote brain trauma that's causing this fragile, or they've always succeeded at everything and everybody's always gone, you're such a good boy, Johnny. And nobody has ever actually demanded excellence from them, or they've never gotten feedback that helps them grow from a situation. So they've won their whole life and all of a sudden they lose because they're now they go from big fish in a little pond to little fish in a big pond, freshmen at college in the SEC or whatever. And they were top dog at their high school and now they're not. And they fail. And they're like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? They immediately internalize it. So with those kinds of athletes, the first thing is switching that reframing things so they can reframing the situation. That failure is not fatal unless, as John Wooden would say, failure is not fatal unless you choose to accept it, unless you make it fatal, unless you quit in that moment. It's the last thing you ever did, then it's a fatal failure. But failure is more like a road sign. It's a guide to let us know we may be on the right track. We're just, like you said, we had the right idea. The execution wasn't there. Like you were talking about earlier with an athlete with unluck. Or we're not on the right track. We need to take a step back and remap this because that road sign says we're not going in the right direction. That starts to eliminate that fragile ego. The other piece is the language we use about removing the uncertainties and giving them certainties and not demeaning them in that moment. If they've got that fragile ego, if they've got that fragile mental strength where when a moment of high adversity or high stress impacts them that way, the last thing we want to do is pile on with yelling and negative language. Here's why. When we yell at our athletes, the prefrontal cortex, the logic part of the brain, the part of the brain that can process, the part of the brain that can think things through, the part of the brain that can strategize, the part of the brain that learns skill, shuts down. And the part of the brain, as Dan Siegel says, the part of the brain that takes over is the amygdala and the brainstem, the base, the primitive part of the brain, the fight, flight, or freeze. So when you scream at somebody, logic is very difficult and skill acquisition is very difficult because their brain has now gone into that fear mode. And so with athletes like that, our first piece of the puzzle to start to build resilience in them is to calm them back down, to get them back into a blue head, as the All Blacks would say. Ask questions. Ask non-defensive questions. What happened? What did you see? Okay, I understand the decision. What was the expected outcome? Okay, great. What could you do differently? And now what you're doing is you're getting them to stay logical, stay in the moment, and realize that it is something they control. I failed because this happened. I didn't see this. I did see this. I should have done this. Great. Let's try it. Let's do it again. This time, implement what you just said. And now you're getting them to remain logical versus upset. The other thing that we need to do with those athletes is it's not about attaboys or attagirls or reassurance. It's not about kumbaya stuff, but it's about remaining empowering and encouraging. You don't have to always say, oh, good job, but you do have to be encouraging. Not there yet. Great effort. We still have a few things to work on. What do you think you could work on? You're getting them again. I'm asking questions because I'm trying to get them into the logical part of their brain. I'm trying to stimulate the part of the brain that is curious, that wants to solve puzzles. I'm not telling them they made a mistake. They haven't solved the puzzle yet. And our brain loves puzzles. So if you give them a puzzle to solve, they will. If you tell them they failed, then that's what their brain's going to latch onto. And so it takes time. But those athletes, they need to start to become more calm. They need to eliminate that fight, flight, or freeze reaction to any past traumas in those situations. They need encouragement and they need feedback. And then they need to start using the logic part of their brain to push through things. From a resilience perspective as a muscle, it's not just bouncing back. And this is the other thing that we can teach our athletes. It's resilience for me is not just bouncing back. Yeah, that's the definition. But sometimes you don't bounce back from something. Sometimes you innovate and work around it. Sometimes you adapt and work through it, like armed forces do. They're teaching their elite special forces to adapt to very uncomfortable situations. Sometimes our athletes have to adapt to very uncomfortable situations. If they reach failure because they've been pushed to their limit, we can't just say, oh, it's okay, you'll bounce back. They don't have the tools yet to bounce back. It's something they've never done before. It's very uncomfortable. We have to teach them how to push through it. We have to teach them how to adapt to that. That's where we come in as coaches. We scaffold that learning process to give them the tools to adapt to it. And like I said, you need creative athletes. If you've got athletes who are independent problem solvers, when they make mistakes, they don't go, oh, crud, I failed. They are excited to solve the puzzle. Oof, man, that didn't work. What did I do? What best feeling ever as a coach is when an athlete makes a mistake. And one thing that I always tried to eliminate from my coaching was subbing a player right after a mistake, because I didn't want to send the message, oh, you make a mistake, you're going to be on my bench, right? So I would give them time. But the first chance that they were supposed to be subbed out and they came out, the best feeling in the world is when that athlete plops down on the bench next to me or comes and stands next to me and goes, whew, man, I blew that, coach. But you know what? Here's what I think. I think I did this, or I think I saw this and this happened, but that's not going to work. We need to try something. When they start solving the puzzle on their own, and I'm just standing there and it's like the perfect questioner, I'm not asking a question at all. I just stare at them. They go, so what do you think, coach? Yeah, you know what, coach, I think, and they start solving it without me ever answering them. I just look at them. So it takes time, but you want to get those creative thinkers who see everything as a challenge and a puzzle and not as a fatal moment in their career.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love those moments too. When the athletes, they get it, they start to try to solve the problems. They feel empowered. They feel safe to say that too, coach. We need to do this, or I think this can work. It's an awesome moment.
Yeah.
One of the other things I was curious about, and again, partly selfish here because it's something that I've had to attempt to navigate over the past, handful of months this last season. Um, you talked about trying to avoid subbing right after a mistake. Would agree with you on that too. Can kind of send the wrong message of, hey, we just punish mistakes here. But let's talk about this situation where, right, you've got an athlete out there on the field, on the court. Something happens and it becomes obvious, their body language, their behavior, that again, they're mentally shook. They're not in it mentally. They're not performing at their best. Two questions here. Number one, when do you take them out? Do you take them out right away? Do you give them a minute to try to work through it? How would you recommend handling that? And then number two, when they come to the bench, what are your thoughts on intervening? Do you do it right away? Do you give them time to cool down? And then at what point is it that, hey, I feel like this kid is ready to get back in the game? And the balance of, are we putting them back in maybe before they're ready to see if they can handle it? Or are we waiting until, hey, they've met the standard for how we act on the bench and how we do things, and I can tell that they're back at closer to that peak performance state? Yeah, so I guess a couple questions there, but how do you handle a situation scenario like that?
Yeah. So part one, there's no, it's just like learning the English language. There's no real hard and fast rules. There's always exceptions to the rules. The subbing thing, yeah, in general rule, I was not a fan of subbing a kid out right after a mistake because I didn't want to send that message. But there's the but word. Having said that, there are times that is the right thing to do for the sake of the athlete and the sake of the situation. That athlete, and you can see it. The athletes wear their emotions out on their sleeves. Most athletes wear them well enough. You can tell. And I had situations where I actually had captains come over and go, so-and-so spiraling, coach, you need to get him out now. And, the advice from a captain who is in the trenches with that player tells me, So there are times that, yes, it might be best to pull them out at that moment. The difference is, one, I've scripted. I was a geek about this. When I would write up my training plans, I didn't just write up the learning, the learning outcomes and the skills and the steps and all of that like you're supposed to. I scripted what I was going to say. I was very geeky about how I spoke to my athletes in practice, to the point where the parents on my one team, it was a joke. I actually had little mini business cards, like little teeny cards printed with the sayings, because the parents would always use them in the games and make jokes about it, like, because unlucky and, you know, with a keeper's hands. And I had these sayings, these pithy fine feet, that I knew if I said those one or two words, that was enough to convey everything we'd worked on in practice, because I'd attached those trigger words to entire training sessions. So if I said something, all my athletes on the field knew exactly what I was alluding to, and were able to go to trigger. Oh yeah, coach is right. It's a corner kick. We got to get to the keeper's hands, because that's where the ball usually ends up, And so I didn't have to yell all that. Just keeper's hands, and they knew. So because everything was scripted, when I was subbing out an athlete, I could usually just say or do something that they knew exactly what I was doing. We're going to hit a reset, oh, it's or next. If they heard me say next, then they knew that I was saying get out of the quagmire. And if I said next and they couldn't get out of it and I'm subbing for them, most of my athletes knew he's bringing me out to give me a moment to hit the reset button. He knows I need it. It's like, it was always the second piece of that is, I didn't throw my clipboard. I didn't slam me. I'm not saying I didn't. Our coaches are emotional. We make a lot of mistakes. And anybody that's seen me coaches knows I'm not a hypocrite. I did this stuff. But in these situations, that player makes a mistake, there's nothing we can do about it to fix it. They are spiraling. The last thing I want to do is have the body language of, oh, when you get over here, you're getting an earful. And we know that look that coaches get. We know that Coach Kilmer from Varsity Blues look that an athlete fears. So my body language is always like, hey, it's okay. Come on over. Come on. I was inviting. I was saying to them, it's fine. You're not going to get yelled at. We're going to fix this. Once they're out. So part two was, what do? You get them out of the game. And it really depended on the athletes. I had some athletes who needed immediate discussion. They needed immediately to be told, it's okay. Let's talk about this. I had some athletes that said, coach, you do have to hammer me, Billy. You got to demand more from me. So they come out, and I knew those athletes, and like, you worked on this in practice. Is this your best? And that's what they wanted from me. Is this your best? Okay, what would your best look like? And now I'm sounding demanding, because that's what this athlete, I had those other athletes that were like, I need a minute, coach. When I come out, I need a minute. Here's the beauty of athletes. They get a look. There is a look. There is a look an athlete gets when they are lost. There is a look an athlete gets when they need somebody to throw them a lifeline. They all get, trust me, they all get it at all levels. You can see it. The famous meltdowns that you were referring to earlier on those golf courses, when I think of Greg the Shark Norman, when he had that massive meltdown at the Masters, the third hit, he got a look on his face that told me, it's like, oh my gosh, this guy needs a reset. But he's melting. He's absolutely melting right there on the golf course in front of national television, international television, right? Athletes get that look. So if that athlete has that look, I know it's time to talk to him. So if I've got an athlete that comes off and they need a second, I always open up the bench. Hey, pop down next to me. It's not a punishment. Hang out with me. And I'll sit back and I'll just keep watching the game. And I'll look over at him. And I may say, what'd you see? Okay. Let me know when you're ready, or what'd you see? Oh, coach, man, here's what happened. And great. All right, let's, so now we're going to start that conversation. I can't do any coaching when they're on the field. We can't. We can't. We have to have them in those meaningful one-on-one moments on the sidelines, and that's where I can actually help fix it. So yeah, I got to get them out of the game, but I've got to do it at a pace that fits.
Yeah, that's good stuff and practical. And like I said, a selfish question, because I've had to navigate that kind of situation more often than I would have liked to, or more often than I had in some previous seasons, just because have had a few of my most skilled players that were also my most mentally fragile players. Just to be totally honest with you, one moment of adversity and then boom, all of a sudden they're shaken, and then trying to navigate. I'm still trying to coach this team as we're playing here and keep my attention on how I can help them. But then also I'm trying to navigate the dynamics of supporting this kid
that obviously isn't in the state they need to be. Our team needs them to be back in the state where they can play at their best. It's just hard. It is really hard. I don't think it's talked about enough. How do you handle those moments? Because how you handle those moments, like you said, we're gonna get quite a few of them wrong, and I got some of them wrong this season for sure. But how you handle those moments does so much for your culture. It can do so much for the relationships you have with the individual kids. It can do so much for the relationships you have with parents too, right? How you navigate and handle those moments, I think, are just critical as coaches, and I think that again, the more that we take the time as coaches to consider beforehand, how am I going to handle these moments? And then, like you said too, how am I going to handle these moments with these individual kids? Because some of them really do respond differently to different things, need different things, want different things. Of just considering beforehand, hey, if Johnny melts down, this is probably how I'm going to handle it. If Reed melts down, this is how I'm going to handle it. I'm even thinking right now, it's like I should probably take a minute to just jot that down for each kid on my team. And just jotting that down, it's gonna make it so much more likely that I handle those moments how I want to handle those moments, how I've thought through them when my brain was also in the right state. Because like you said too, sometimes our emotions flare up, and then you've got an emotional athlete, an emotional coach, both of which just their amygdala is firing, and then they're trying to it's just a recipe for disaster. We see it all the time, right? So,
Oh yeah. No, brilliant.
yeah.
You made me think of two things when you said that. So one, I love the fact that you're like, I should write down how I should interact with each player. We should all do that, right? And we should all just ask them at the beginning of the season. We're going to set guidelines and ground rules and rules of engagement. And what is one thing that you wish I knew about you as a player that would help me coach you better? Or how do you best like to be coached in high pressure situations? They talk about, there's a famous scene with, I think it was Steve Kerr yelling at Kevin Durant and getting in his face or something. Everybody's like, "Oh man, I thought he was a great coach. Now look at him yelling." And then I guess Kevin, I don't remember the exact story, but Kevin or whoever the athlete was came out and said, "No, I've told coach that's how I want to be treated in high pressure situations. It's the only way to get through to me is to get in my face." And so, that's what that athlete needs, and that's the established rules of engagement. And there's no damage going to be done because they've said. Then you can remind them, "This is how you wanted me to be. This is how we're going." I love that. The other thing that you said was something that reminded me of something that Coach Karai does at USA Volleyball with the women's Olympic team. He would, after every play, they come in and they get a high five. They come back to a circle, the players on the court, they get a high five, and they look each other in the eye. And one of his reasons for doing it was, when a mistake is made, I need immediately everybody to give eye contact. They need to be looked in the eyes. They need to reconnect with their teammates and be told, it's okay, let's move on to the next point. So he's cutting off those spiraling moments before they ever happen, because the players make a mistake and immediately they're pulled in and they're like, fist bump, we're good, let's do this, okay, we got this. And I'm watching my son's volleyball team, and they are a very good team. There's a lot of raw talent. They're very good. There's a ton of potential, but they have these couple of games watching this past weekend. Almost every point was an unforced error or a communication error. So it wasn't a lack of skill. It was lack of communication and lack of execution. And what I watched was they would give up 2 or 3 points and then spiral. And 7 points later, they're digging themselves out of a hole. They weren't coming in as a group and doing the high fives. And my son's the captain, and I haven't had that conversation with him yet, but that was one of the things I was going to suggest, is check out, this research done by, or this work done by Coach Karai. Would this help you all? Because they were cutting it off right there. And you mentioned, like, how do we stop it in the moment? One of the best ways is to work with your team, to train your team to be the people that pick each other up. There was a basketball team, I can't remember, it was high school, I think. They won a state championship. The player missed a free throw that could have been the game-winning free throw, and her head went down, and every player gave her a high five, and then she ends up hitting the game-winning shot like 10 seconds later. And she talks about, well, I had the confidence because my teammates still believed in me even when I messed up. Boom, right there. Like, as a coach, that'd be the greatest weapon I ever had, was to teach my teammates to pick each other up in the moment. And then, if I have to, if it's not working, I'll sub them out.
That's good stuff. Yeah, another great example there, talking about the USA Volleyball team. Well, Coach, this has been fantastic. Before we wrap it up and I let you share a little bit about where coaches can grab a copy of your book, I have 3 quick rapid fire questions for you. Just want to know the first thing that comes to your mind. The first one is this: the most fun part of coaching is
the light bulb moments. And it doesn't have to be a skill acquisition, but just that moment when you see a kid's eyes light up because they've solved a puzzle or they've reached a different level in the game. And it's the best moment in the world.
yeah, it's awesome. Second one, I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
Wish I'd have known something about the soft side of coaching before my first coaching experience. How does the brain work? How everything outside of the skill itself.
That's good stuff. And the last one, I know I'm successful as a coach when
This one is a tearjerker, but I've had players come up to me and say that they coach their daughter's team now because they wanted a coach like me. I've had players reach out and say, I'm in town for a day and I just wanted to spend some time with you. And, sacrificed, like the one drove all the way down from LA to come see us, which could be, depending on traffic, a 4-hour drive just to spend the afternoon on the beach. Wedding invitations, announcements, little notes, it's how I define success. I don't have a trophy case anymore. I keep memorabilia. These are all the memories that I have of the times I spent with my athletes. And my hope is that I would feel successful if I knew that athletes had good memories of the time they spent.
That's beautiful. That's really well said. Well, Coach, share with the listeners where they can get a copy of your book, when it releases, and where they can connect with you and learn more about the work you're doing.
Yeah, I'd love to. So Spartan Mindset, it comes out, let me get that there. It comes out April 18th. It's actually out on pre-order now. Very cool. I'm able to, every once in a while I look at Amazon or it's on, you can find it anywhere. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, Books A Million, Bookshop, Booktopia. If you're not in the US, it's being carried in WH Smith. And it's most major retailers have it. And it is on Amazon as well. But I can see the numbers. So I'm seeing that people are pre-ordering, which is really exciting. If you go to fullspartan.com, though, I do have a pre-order bonus that if you pre-order the book before April 18th, I'm throwing in some bonuses, I'm doing a free video study guide of the book myself. I'm going to read my own book and do a study guide on it, and discounts on future courses, things like that. And then to find me in general, coachreed.com. And I'm not just this book. I've talked to a few people in other industries. This book is transcendental. It's not just for sports. So it doesn't matter the industry you're in. The language is the linchpin. It's where the bottleneck is between the brain and the body and performance. So no matter what you're doing as a performer, stage, classroom, business, trading floor, the Spartan Mindset is one of the best ways to make sure that you show up every day and you unlock your own excellence in everything you do. So please check out the book, even if you're not an athlete.
Awesome. Coach Reed, we appreciate your time. Thanks for the work you're doing and for sharing with coaches.
Thank you.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Coach Reed for joining me. You can find links to connect with Coach Reed and get his book in the show details. And don't forget to check out the show details if you'd like the free podcast notes or if you're interested in the mentorship program. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week.